When I started playing Dungeons of Hinterberg, I quickly came to the conclusion that this would be one of my favorite games of 2024. I really liked the heavily stylized graphics, the way the game blended puzzle solving and the combat of an action RPG with the cozy and immersive atmosphere of a life sim. However, when I was around halfway through the game, fatigue started setting in and cracks such as the repetitive nature of the game started to show. Despite this, I strongly believe it's worth checking out, as the premise is both enticing and unique. You're on vacation in the cozy town of Hinterberg in the Alps. Nothing unusual about that, but your vacation isn't only about relaxation, socializing, and taking in the scenery. I mean, it is about all that, but it's also about slaying, which means slaying monsters with your trusty sword, magic spells, and special abilities. While you're doing all of that, you're finding new gear and solving intriguing puzzles in the 25 dungeons that one day just magically appeared in Hinterberg. The appearance of the dungeons have turned the once sleepy town into a tourist destination, now brimming with aspiring adventurers where money always comes first and safety always comes second. In a way, playing the game feels like visiting a theme park. It's a deeply immersive yet unnatural experience. Dungeons of Hinterberg's gameplay experience is separated into three main segments of the day: noon, afternoon, and evening. Clearly drawing inspiration from the Persona series, each segment offers a different gameplay experience. It's also important to note that you will never feel stressed for time while going through your daily cycle, as time is only advanced through your choices and doesn't pass automatically. Noon is spent exploring in one of 4 semi-open world areas surrounding the town of Hinterberg. Here you will go for a hike and relax, find treasure chests, solve minor puzzles, interact with random adventures, and fight groups of enemies, all while taking in the beauty of the 4 distinct regions. Each region also comes with its very own pair of magical spells. The first biome, for instance, offers you access to a giant bomb that you can explode at will, along with a magical chain for pulling certain things towards you. Other spells include summoning a tornado that can be used for picking up both yourself and items, and a magical snowboard allowing you to traverse the snowy landscapes at high speeds. Each unique pair of magical abilities, while they can't be used in combat, are integral to the puzzle solving, both in the open world sections and inside the dungeons located in each region. As such, the regions and the dungeons are very distinct from each other, not only visually but also when it comes to the puzzle solving experience. It is also while exploring the 4 open world areas that you will decide what you want to spend the afternoon doing. Do you want to delve deep into one of the area's dungeons in search of loot, or do you simply want to find one of the cozy relaxation spots and spend the afternoon hanging out by the lake for a permanent stat increase? This no pressure approach, and how you're rewarded in some way no matter what you choose to do, is an important part of what makes the game such a joy to play. There's never any rush, you're on vacation after all. Usually though, at least in my case, the afternoon would be spent going through a dungeon. The dungeons mainly differentiate from the open world stuff by being a more linear experience with harder combat and more advanced puzzles. They varied quite a bit, and while some dungeons felt a bit repetitive, others were a breath of fresh air that offered unique experiences. The dungeon's mix of combat and puzzles are clearly Zelda inspired, but inspiration is also drawn from other games. Upon entering one of the dungeons, I got the distinct impression that this dungeon was drawing heavily on the flow state game Solar Ash for inspiration. Generally, each dungeon seemed to have one or multiple themes. Often they start by teaching you the basic concept of how to solve a specific type of puzzle. The puzzles then gradually increase in difficulty over the course of the dungeon. After slaying, it's time to relax in town for the night. The evening is spent shopping for new equipment and consumables, and hanging out with and befriending one of the game's many characters. Befriending the different characters offers unique and often extremely useful and powerful rewards. Hanging out with the different characters also offers increases to 1 or multiple of 4 social stats. These only have a slight effect on gameplay, so I will not delve further into these. The best part about hanging out in town was neither the rewards nor the stat increases. Instead, it was simply taking in the atmosphere and enjoying a dialogue cutscene with one of the game's generally compelling and charming characters. So now that we have gone over the general gameplay loop, let's talk about difficulty. I played the game on normal difficulty, and both the puzzles and the combat was relatively easy. During puzzle sections, I would sometimes get stuck for a few minutes, but I always ended up figuring them out. Usually the culprit of me getting stuck was me overthinking the puzzle, more so than the puzzle being brutally difficult. I did die a few times throughout my playthrough, but death is very forgiving and starts you out very close to where you were. I did not particularly enjoy the boss fights, as they did not offer much challenge and generally just seemed like more annoying versions of puzzles that I had already beaten. As for the combat itself, I liked it. It plays like a typical straightforward third-person action RPG with moves such as light and heavy attack, a lock-on function, and a dodge roll. As mentioned earlier, you can also utilize magic spells unique to each region, and while you can imagine exploding a massive bomb on top of a pack of enemies is pretty useful, I found myself not using the magic that often. Instead, I found myself leaning heavily into the use of attack conduits. These are essentially skill gems that you can equip that offers you unique abilities on a short cooldown, clearly inspired by games like Diablo or Torchlight. Among these attack conduits are a spin to win whirlwind ability, a leap ability, and the ability to shower the battlefield in meteors. The itemization allows you to customize your character skills to your desired playstyle. This is done through weapons, armor pieces, and a charm system, which offers bonuses such as slowing time on perfect dodge, shorter cooldowns on attack conduits, or increased magic damage. While the itemization isn't exactly deep, I think the developers have found a pretty good middle ground of making it accessible but still engaging and meaningful. As for the enemy design, this is one of the areas where I really started to feel fatigued while playing the game. The game essentially only has a handful of different enemy types, excluding the bosses of course, and they all look rather similar and mechanically they're not very distinct from each other either. Most of the enemies have well telegraphed attacks or shoot projectiles for you to avoid. These projectiles are also telegraphed and you'll get little warning flashes when attacks are coming from outside your field of view, allowing you ample time to dodge them. Because of this, I never felt like I was fighting the camera during combat, and generally the game's combat experience was positive and felt very fair. However, fighting the same enemies 10 hours into the game with the exact same moveset that I was also fighting within the first hour of the game started to wear me out. At this point, combat started feeling very samey, and it was only due to unlocking cool new attack conduits, decreasing my cooldowns, and the general sense of power progression that I didn't start actively hating the combat at this point. At around the same time, the game's puzzles also started suffering from similar issues. They started feeling more repetitive and I felt like I was playing the same puzzles over and over. Thankfully this got better as I progressed to the later dungeons and I once again encountered more unique and more interesting puzzles. The only aspect of the game where I never felt fatigued at all was the evening where I was hanging out with the other characters in Hinterberg, and that's mostly what kept me going throughout the middle portion of the game. As the type of gamer that usually prefers as much content as possible, I strongly feel that the game would have benefited from a less is more approach. If it had been 20 dungeons of Hinterberg instead of 25 dungeons of Hinterberg, and a couple more enemy types had been added in their place, I think the game would have been significantly better off. So at this point I should probably also talk about the platforming, as the gameplay you're seeing might make you think that this game is also a solid platformer. I really did not like the platforming in this game. The game does not have a dedicated jump button and will instead just jump when you run towards the ledge. I was fighting with this mechanic sometimes and it led to some accidental deaths, but it wasn't a major issue for me. It's just important to say that I really did not enjoy the platforming one bit, and thankfully there's not too much of it in the game. It's not the main focus of the game, so it is something, but just know that it's not good. In the end, Dungeons of Hinterberg took me roughly 18 hours to complete, unlocking most of the achievements and exploring the majority of the game. If you beeline through the game, it can probably be done in around 10 to 12 hours, but I think you'll be missing out by doing so. Despite my issues with Dungeons of Hinterberg, it is important to keep in mind that the game was developed by a small team of indie developers, and I think the scope and end result is very impressive keeping that in mind. I experienced no technical issues while playing the game aside from popping, which was pretty prevalent. However, the amazing stylized art lends itself well to these technical limitations, as the pop-in hardly bothered me. When you're walking around the town of Hinterberg, you will constantly see random people fading in and out, likely due to technical limitations, but for all I know it could be an artistic choice. Either way, it just works. Both the soundtrack and sound design were pleasant and well executed, but it's worth noting that the game is not voice acted. So it does come with a lot of reading if you intend to follow the game's story. All in all, I think the presentation is excellent and it makes for a very immersive experience that almost feels like a real vacation. Unfortunately, I'm somebody who frequently experiences motion sickness when playing first-person games, and unfortunately I found that Dungeons of Hinterberg is one of the very rare third-person games that also give me some issues with motion sickness. Fortunately, my issues weren't too severe, and I suspect the stylized graphics along with motion blur could be the culprit. On this front, it's worth noting that the game is very light on accessibility options. You can thankfully disable screen shake, but other than that, the only other option was to enable a static UI overlay, which did help somewhat with the motion sickness. Unfortunately, this static UI was so immersion breaking that I would have rather not played the game at all if it was my only option. Controls work great, both with keyboard and mouse and with a controller. Granted, I did find my mouse vastly superior for aiming compared to the controller, and I think the game could benefit from some aim assist for certain fast-paced puzzle segments. It should also be mentioned that Dungeons of Hinterberg offers no character creator. You play as Louisa and you cannot change her looks. Actually, the game does not offer any sort of visual customization, which was disappointing to say the least. That being said, it's a fault I'm willing to forgive considering how much else is on offer here. I like the game's story quite a bit, and I feel like it would fit right in with several young adult fantasy novels. For this reason, the story might not be for everyone. Likewise, the game's character also might not be for everyone, as many of them are strongly based on various stereotypes. Personally, I found this humorous rather than derivative. I also found the inherent mystery of why and how the dungeons appeared and what they are very compelling. I think a lot of the game's story is excellent and funny commentary on several real-world issues such as politics, fame, esports, and gaming in general. As an example of this, you're very early into the game informed that the monsters you fight are incapable of thinking and feeling any emotion. I constantly questioned this as I was playing through the game, as you will often see monsters running or cowering in fear as you bring down their health bars. But how could they do that if they don't feel any emotions? Could someone be willing to lie about this, all for profits? The world of Hinterberg is at its core very realistic and believable, but with the dungeons and magic coming into the mix, it's been gamified to the point where the town even has its own currency called Hinterbucks. I could certainly see some of this being a commentary on microtransactions and general greed in modern day gaming. The game is generally self-aware without breaking the fourth wall, and there will often be little quips about things like whether it's cheating to look up a guide for a dungeon or not. Okay, so final verdict on the game. I really like Dungeons of Hinterberg. When the game was over, I felt sad, and to me that speaks to the game being excellent. I felt sad to leave the game, I felt sad that I would have to stop interacting with the game's characters, and I felt sad that my time exploring was over. That being said, it's kind of contradictory because at the same time I obviously would really like for the game to have had a less is more approach, because I feel the middle of the game was drawn out, and I feel especially with the low enemy variety, it was a slog to get through the middle portion of the game. So realistically, I wouldn't have wanted the game to be longer, but I was still sad. So great game. I would rate the game at 8.5 out of 10. And had they gone for less is more approach and had they offered better visual customization, I would probably have rated the game at 9 out of 10, maybe even 9.5 out of 10. I really like the game. The game is available on PC and Xbox. It's also on Game Pass, so I think it has an excellent value proposition, especially if you're a Game Pass member. Anyways, thank you so much for watching and have a very nice day.